The Cathedral of Calverton is cold on a morning in late November, the kind of cold that settles into stone and refuses to leave. And the candles along the nave are guttering in a draught that comes from nowhere anyone can identify. Lady Honoria Pembroke stands at the altar in a gown the color of winter cream, her hands steady at her sides, the vows half spoken between them. And the man beside her, Edward Calverton, Duke of Calverton, a man she has spoken to precisely 4 times in her life, leans close. He does not look at the congregation. He does not look at the priest. He looks only at her, and what he says, under his breath, in a voice that carries no further than her ear, is this: "Before this is over, you will beg me for mercy." The congregation hears a murmur and assumes tenderness. Honoria does not flinch. She does not hesitate. She completes her vow herself, in a clear voice that reaches the back of the nave. And then she turns, not to the priest, not to the assembled faces of the county, but to Edward alone. And she returns, in a voice equally quiet and equally certain. "I have never begged anything in my life, and I do not intend to begin with you." The ring is pressed onto her finger, his grip a fraction too firm, hers refusing to tremble. Neither of them knows yet that the other is telling the truth. The wedding breakfast that follows is glacial in the particular way that large, expensive meals can be, when no one at the table is comfortable. The long gallery of Calverton Hall has been dressed with hothouse flowers and silver plate and enough candles to warm a smaller room, and none of it touches the temperature. Honoria sits at the head of the table she did not choose, eating the food she did not order, and watches every person in the room watch her back. The household staff observes the new Duchess with the careful attention of people cataloging a specimen. She registers this: the particular stillness of the footman nearest the sideboard, the way the housekeeper, a narrow-faced woman named Mrs. Price, pauses fractionally too long before refilling the nearest glass. She registers, too, the man at Edward's left, Mr. Vane, the estate manager, who moves through the guests with the practiced warmth of someone who has spent years making himself indispensable. He is perhaps 50, well-dressed, with a manner so consistently pleasant that it reads, to someone paying attention, as a kind of armor. "You must find Calverton very different from Pembroke House," Vane says, leaning toward her during the soup course. His smile is perfect. "A great estate takes time to learn." "It does," Honoria agrees. "I find I learn quickly." Vane's smile does not change. He turns back to his soup. At the far end of the table, Aldous Calverton, Edward's cousin, his presumptive heir, a man of approximately 35, with the easy manners of someone who has never been required to work hard for anything, catches Honoria's eye and raises his glass with a warmth that is entirely convincing and entirely empty behind the eyes. She raises hers in return. She has met men like Aldous before. Her father's estate had attracted several. Edward, for his part, speaks to no one more than courtesy requires. He sits at her right hand and fulfills the social obligations of a duke at his own wedding breakfast with the mechanical precision of a man performing a task he has scheduled and intends to complete. He does not speak to Honoria at all. She does not speak to him. They are, she thinks, performing the same play from different scripts, and neither of them has read the other's part. She eats. She answers questions about the estate at Pembroke, about her late father, the Viscount, about whether she finds the north cold. She watches Vane. She watches Aldous. She watches the footman at the sideboard, who is watching her. She catalogues everything she sees with the same methodical attention her father had taught her to bring to an account book. Not because she knows yet what she is looking for, but because she has learned, in 4 years of managing a failing estate alone, that the thing you missed is always the thing you did not think to notice. Her father had died in March. Her uncle, his debts pressing on him from every direction, had arranged the marriage by April. She had arrived at Calverton Cathedral in November. In the 8 months between, she had wound up the Pembroke estate, settled what debts could be settled, arranged for her sister Margaretta to stay with a cousin in the South, and packed 4 trunks of books, account ledgers, and her mother's correspondence into a hired coach. She had not wept for any of it. She had not had time. What she had done, on the last night at Pembroke House, was sit alone in the study where her brother Thomas had died at 22 of what the physician had called a sudden fever. And she had looked at the empty chair where he used to sit, and she had made herself, quietly and without ceremony, a single promise: that she would not look away from something that did not add up. Not again. Not ever again. She had been 19 when Thomas died. She had been frightened and young, and she had trusted the physician and buried her brother, and told herself she was being foolish to wonder. She was 38 now, and she was not frightened, and she did not intend to trust anything she had not verified herself. She finishes her meal. She thanks Aldous Calverton for his welcome. She allows Mrs. Price to show her to her rooms. And that evening, while the house settles into its night routines, she locates the study Edward has locked. And she waits. She does not wait long. Edward opens the door himself at 10:30, intending, she suspects, to dismiss whatever servant has been scratching at the wood, and finds her standing in the corridor with a candle and an expression of complete composure. He looks at her for a moment. Then he says flatly, "Go to your rooms." "I would prefer not to," Honoria says, and walks past him into the study. The room is a kind of organized catastrophe. Estate ledgers cover 3 surfaces. A map of the Calverton lands is pinned to the wall with a dozen notations she cannot yet decipher. Papers are spread across the desk in a pattern that suggests someone has been working through them in sequence and working urgently and has not yet found what they are looking for. The fire has burned low. There are 2 candles on the desk and a third on the mantelpiece, and all 3 have been burning for some time. "I said," Edward begins. "I heard you," Honoria says. She's looking at the open ledger on the nearest table. She picks it up. She runs her finger down the left-hand column, quantities, dates, supplier names. And then she stops. She reads the entry twice. Then she reads it a 3rd time, because she wants to be certain before she speaks. "Why?" she says aloud, not accusingly, but in the tone of someone working through a calculation. "Does this estate purchase 4 times the laudanum base that a household of this size could use in a quarter, and has done so, according to this column, for 2 years running?" The room goes very still. She looks up. Edward is standing 3 feet away, and the deliberate cruelty that has been his default expression since the cathedral, the expression she has decided is a tactic rather than a character, has dropped from his face entirely. He is looking at the column, then at her, then at the column again. He does not ask her to leave a second time. "Close the door," he says instead. She does. He tells her what he knows. He does it standing, with his hands behind his back, watching her face as he speaks, watching, she understands, for a reaction that would tell him something he does not yet know about her. "My older brother, James, died 18 months ago," Edward says. The physician recorded it as heart failure. He was 41 and had no history of weakness in that area, but men die unexpectedly, and I told myself that. He pauses. 6 months after James, my cousin William died. 3 months after that, my aunt, Lady Cornelia. Both recorded as natural causes. Both, I now think, were not. Honoria listens without interrupting. "I have no proof," Edward continues. "I have a pattern, and I have a household I cannot trust. and I have a marriage that was arranged by men I suspect are responsible for 3 deaths. And I do not know whether you are innocent of it, or whether you were placed here to give them a convenient party to blame when the time came. I was sold to you by an uncle with debts, Honoria says. I did not know to whom those debts were owed until this moment. If it is Mr. Vane, I would appreciate you saying so plainly. Edward looks at her for a long moment. It is Vane, he says. And Aldous. I thought it might be. She sets the ledger on the desk, open to the page she has been reading. This column. The laudanum base purchases began 2 years ago, 4 months before your cousin William's death. The signature on the purchase orders is not yours, and it is not Mrs. Price's. I do not yet recognize the hand, but I can tell you that whoever signed these orders has done so consistently, once per quarter, always for the same supplier, always for an amount that cannot be explained by any legitimate household use I can calculate. Edward crosses to the desk and looks at the column. He looks at it for a long time. I have been staring at these books for 6 months, he says. And for the first time, his voice contains something other than control. 6 months, and I could not find where it was. You were looking for a name, Honoria says. I was looking for a number that did not fit. Those are different searches. She looks at him steadily. Tell me everything you know, all of it. Then I will tell you what I can read in these books, and we will see what we have between us. He tells her. It takes an hour. Neither of them sits down. The terms of the marriage rearrange themselves somewhere in that hour. Not dramatically, not with any single statement that marks the turning point. But gradually, the way a room changes when someone opens a window. They are no longer lord and disposable bride. They are the only 2 people in the house who can see the same danger, and they are standing on the same side of the desk. By the end of it, Honoria has identified the signature on the purchase orders as belonging to Dr. Sefton, the estate physician whose name she has seen twice in the household accounts, and once in the margin of a letter she found in the corridor that afternoon, which she has not yet mentioned because she wanted to understand the context first. She mentions it now. Edward goes very still, in a way that is different from before. Not the stillness of a man reading a column of figures, but of a man absorbing a blow he had half expected and hoped would not land. Sefton has been with the estate for 12 years, he says. Then he has had 12 years to become trusted, Honoria says. Show me where the dispensary is kept. Over the days that follow, they work the ledgers together. The study becomes their territory, nights at the table, mornings cross-referencing the estate's medical records against the apothecary accounts. The fire kept burning because neither of them keeps regular hours anymore, and Mrs. Price has apparently decided that the new Duchess's habits are simply unusual rather than suspicious. Each session pushes the pattern closer to a name and closer to a method. Dr. Sefton's prescription records are kept in a locked cabinet in the dispensary. On the 3rd day, Honoria presents herself to the dispensary attendant as the new mistress of the house conducting an audit of the household medical stores. A perfectly ordinary domestic request. The kind a new chatelaine might make in her first week. The kind no one in a well-ordered household would think to refuse. She retrieves the prescription register, thanks the attendant pleasantly, and carries it back to the study under her arm. Edward is waiting when she returns. He looks at the register in her hands and then at her face, and he does not say anything for a moment. You walked in there, he says finally, and simply asked for it. I am the Duchess of Calverton, Honoria says, setting the register on the desk. I asked for a household record. There was no reason for him to refuse. She opens the register to the most recent entries. Sit down. This will take some time to cross-reference. He sits. They work, late one night, near dawn. When the fire has burned to its last hour and the candles on the desk are guttering, Honoria falls asleep over the open ledgers. She does not intend to. She is in the middle of a column, her finger tracking an entry. And then she is simply gone, her cheek resting on her folded arm, her breathing slow and even. Edward, working at the map on the opposite side of the desk, does not notice immediately. When he does, he is still for a moment. Then he rises, takes his own coat from the back of his chair, and drapes it across her shoulders, carefully, so as not to wake her. He moves the nearest candle away from the edge of her sleeve, where it is too close. Then he stands beside her for a long moment, long enough that the candle he has moved burns down another 1/4 inch, before he returns to the map. It is on the 5th day that they identify the compound. Sefton's prescription register, cross-referenced against the apothecary accounts and a medical text Honoria locates in the estate library, reveals a slow-accumulating tincture administered under the name of a nerve treatment, indistinguishable in small doses from a legitimate preparation, lethal only over months of consistent use. This is why the deaths had looked natural. This is why the pattern had been so difficult to see. He would have prescribed it as a preventive, Honoria says. Something for the nerves, for the digestion. Perfectly ordinary. The patient takes it regularly because the physician recommends it, and by the time the accumulation reaches a dangerous level, it has been months. There is no single dose to point to. James was prescribed a nerve treatment, Edward says. His voice is entirely flat. 14 months before he died. Yes, Honoria says, her eyes remaining on the register. I thought it might be something like that. They go to the dispensary together that afternoon to examine the locked vials. The cabinet holds a row of sealed bottles, each labeled in Sefton's careful hand. Both of them reach for the same bottle at the same moment. A sealed vial labeled Tinctura Nervina, Compound 3. And Edward's hand closes over hers before she can lift it. Don't open it, he says, and don't breathe near it, not until we know what the compound is. His hand does not release hers immediately. He is looking at the vial, not at her. And when he speaks again, his voice is quieter. I should have found this 6 months ago. You found it now, Honoria says. That is what matters. He releases her hand. They leave the dispensary. That evening, Vane finds Honoria in the long gallery before dinner. Your Grace, he says, with a smile that never reaches anything behind it. I hope you are settling into the house comfortably. Very comfortably, thank you, Honoria says. I only mention, Vane continues pleasantly, as though he is discussing the weather, that a young wife new to a great estate can sometimes make herself unpopular by asking questions the house has already answered. The staff can find it unsettling. It creates a certain atmosphere. He lets the words sit there. I am grateful for your counsel, Honoria says, in a tone of complete sincerity. It is exactly the kind of guidance I would hope to receive from a trusted member of the household. Vane holds her gaze for a moment. Then he nods and moves away toward the other guests. That night, alone in her room, Honoria opens her notebook and records his exact words, the time, the location, and the names of the 3 guests standing within earshot. The entry in the dispensary register is dated 3 days before the wedding. Honoria finds it on a Wednesday morning, and it takes her a moment to understand what she is reading. Because the address is not a Calverton address, and the recipient is not a Calverton name. 1 sealed bottle, Tinctura Nervina, Compound 3, dispatched by post to Lady Margaretta Pembroke. Her sister's address in the South, written in Sefton's careful hand, recorded as a wedding gift from the estate to the bride's family. The post has already left. 3 days ago. Honoria carries the register to the study and places it open on the desk without speaking. She does not need to speak. The entry is there, and Edward reads it, and he looks up at her. She's standing with her hands pressed flat on the table, not moving. The composure that has held her through every moment of the past weeks, through the altar, through the wedding breakfast, through Vane's smile in the dispensary and the long nights over the ledgers, is not gone, but it has changed shape. Something beneath it is visible, briefly, through the surface. Edward crosses the room. He takes both her hands from the table and holds them against his chest, and he does not let go. "We will stop it," he says. "The post has been gone 3 days," Honoria says. Her voice is steady. "We will ride for it. There is a junction at Hadsley. The post coach passes through at approximately 2 in the morning. If we leave tonight, we can reach it." He pauses. "But first, I need to tell you something." She waits. "James asked me at the end to take care of the line," Edward says. "Those were his last words to me. I sat with him for 3 weeks while he weakened, and I told myself I was imagining what I suspected, and I did nothing in time, and he died asking me to do the thing I had already failed to do." He stops. "I have been trying to find the proof ever since, and I have been afraid every day that I am the kind of man who doubts while the people he should protect are dying." Honoria's hands tighten around his. "You are not that man," she says. "That man would not have spent 6 months in this study." They remain like that, hands clasped between them until the fire in the grate burns down to ash and the room grows cold around them. Honoria does not say, not yet, what she has understood in the last 10 minutes. That the compound in the vials is almost certainly what killed her brother Thomas 16 years ago, at 22, of a sudden fever. That the physician who attended Pembroke House in those years had trained under Sefton's predecessor. That the pattern is too precise to be coincidence. She keeps that knowledge inside herself because there will be time for it later. And right now there is a post coach passing through Hadsley at 2 in the morning. The following morning, Edward tells her she must leave Calverton. He says it in the study, with the map between them, in the tone of someone who has made a decision and considers it final. He has arranged for her to stay with a cousin in the next county. A safe house, away from Vane and Aldous and Sefton, away from every locked cabinet in this building. She is to go today quietly, with a traveling excuse that will not arouse suspicion. "No," Honoria says. "Honoria, if I leave without explanation, Vane will know within the day that we have identified the pattern," she says. "He will move before you can assemble proof that will hold before a magistrate. You will have nothing." She looks at him directly. "You are doing the same thing you did with James. You are choosing distance because you cannot bear to watch and you think that distance is protection. It is not protection. It is absence." The silence that follows is not comfortable. "That is not fair," Edward says, and his voice has something raw in it. "It is precisely fair," Honoria says, "and you know it." She moves to the door. "I have already ordered 2 horses saddled. The junction at Hadsley is 4 hours' ride. If we leave within the hour, we will reach it before the post coach does. Are you coming, or do you intend to keep arguing?" He comes. The ride is through a frozen night, the road hard under the horses' hooves, the sky clear and brutally cold. They do not speak much. There is not much to say that the riding does not say for them. 2 people on the same road, at the same pace, toward the same thing. They reach the junction at Hadsley, with 40 minutes to spare. The post coach arrives on time, the coachman startled to find a duke and a duchess waiting in the road with a lantern. Edward presents his seal. He explains briefly, that a package addressed to Lady Margaretta Pembroke must be retrieved before delivery on grounds of a family matter. The coachman, faced with a ducal seal and a very composed duchess, produces the package without argument. It is still sealed. On the ride back, Honoria holds the package in her gloved hands and does not speak for a long time. "She is safe," Edward says. "She is safe," Honoria agrees. When they return to the study, cold and damp from the ride, the fire long dead and the candles burned out, Edward lights a new candle, and Honoria sets the sealed package on the desk beside the register. They stand in the small circle of candlelight, and neither of them moves immediately to do anything practical. "Why were you cruel to me at the altar?" Honoria asks. She asks it simply, without accusation, the way she would ask a question in the ledger. Edward looks at her. "Because I needed you to hate me enough to refuse the marriage," he says. "Or, having accepted it, to leave the estate before they had time to use you. I thought if you despised me thoroughly, you would find a reason to go." He pauses. "It did not work." "No," Honoria says. Her voice is quiet. "It did not." She steps forward and kisses him, once slowly, without urgency, her cold hands finding the front of his coat. It is not gratitude. She has thought about it for 4 hours on a frozen road, and she has made a decision, and this is what the decision looks like. The intercepted package reaches Vane's knowledge within a day. Someone in the stable has talked. Honoria had expected as much, and she tells Edward so when he comes to the study that afternoon with the news that Vane has been asking questions about the night ride. "They know we have the bottle," Edward says. "They know we intercepted it," Honoria says. "They do not yet know what else we have." That distinction matters. She is writing at the desk. "Do not interrupt me for a moment." She finishes 2 letters, seals them, and hands them to the most junior footman in the house, a boy of 17 who has, she has observed, no particular loyalty to Vane, and a great deal of loyalty to the wage that the ducal household pays him. She instructs him to post them in the village, not from the estate. Edward, who has been reading over her shoulder for the last 2 letters, says nothing until she has sent the boy on his way. "You wrote to the county magistrate," he says. "Sir William Denny," Honoria says. "He was a friend of my father's. He has been to Pembroke House 6 times that I can remember, and he will come if I ask him. I have invited him as a guest to Aldous' dinner next week. He will not appear to be anything other than a social acquaintance." She straightens the remaining papers on the desk. "I also wrote to Dr. Harwell, who has attended Margaretta's household for years. I have asked him to examine any recent gift of medicinal preparations before she uses them. He will understand what I mean without my having to state it plainly." "You did this," Edward says, "without telling me." "I am telling you now." She looks at him. "I have shown you both letters. I have explained my reasoning. If you have an objection, I am prepared to hear it." He reads both letters again. Then he sets them on the desk. "I have no objection," he says. 2 days before Aldous' dinner, Vane finds Honoria alone in the long gallery. She's examining the portraits on the eastern wall, the Calverton line going back 4 generations. And she hears him come in, though she does not turn immediately. "Your Grace," Vane says, and this time the pleasantness is gone. Entirely, without apology. "I think it is time we spoke plainly." Honoria turns to face him. "The evidence you believe you hold," Vane says, "is incomplete. A register, a bottle, a set of accounts that could be explained in several ways by anyone with the appropriate knowledge. You are a woman with no independent standing in this house and no history in this county. Whatever you think you have assembled, I can tell you that there are arrangements in place, arrangements your husband cannot undo quickly enough to matter, that will determine how this situation resolves." He says it quietly, without raising his voice. It is, Honoria thinks, the most direct threat she has ever received, and it is delivered with the same pleasant composure he brings to everything. "Are you finished?" she asks. Vane holds her gaze. He gives a single nod. "Thank you," Honoria says. She turns back to the portrait she was examining. Edward's brother James, painted perhaps 5 years before his death. Looking out from the canvas, with a face that is recognizably a Calverton face and an expression of considerable intelligence. "I appreciate your candor. It is so much easier to work with, in the end, than pleasantness." She hears Vane leave the gallery. She remains looking at the portrait for another moment. Then she goes to find Edward and tells him, word for word, what was said. Aldous' dinner fills the long gallery with county guests, neighbors, magistrates, the vicar, 3 families from the nearest town. Sir William Denny seated 4 places down from Vane, and introduced to the room as an old acquaintance of the late Viscount Pembroke, which he is. Aldous presides over the table with the ease of a man who believes the evening is already won. He refills Honoria's glass with courteous frequency and asks her twice whether she is finding Calverton to her taste. "Very much," she tells him, both times. She eats through 3 courses in apparent ease. She answers questions about the estate, accepts compliments on the wedding flowers, asks the vicar about the parish school. Vane watches her from the far end of the table, and she lets him watch. And she gives him nothing to see but a duchess at her own table being gracious. When the dessert plates are cleared, Honoria stands. The table goes quiet, not immediately, but in the spreading way that silence travels when someone has risen with a purpose that the room can sense before it can name. Aldous' smile flickers very briefly. Vane goes entirely still. Honoria places 3 items on the table in front of her. The apothecary ledger, open to the quarterly purchase records. Dr. Sefton's prescription register, open to the entries for the past 2 years. And the sealed bottle, retrieved from the post coach at the Hadsley Junction, still carrying its label in Sefton's hand, still addressed to Lady Margaretta Pembroke. "I will not take much of the evening," she says, in a voice that carries the full length of the gallery. "I only want to read some figures aloud, because I think they are the kind of figures that benefit from being heard." She reads, "Not accusations, only numbers. Quantities purchased, dates of purchase, the supplier's name, the signature on the orders." She reads the prescription register entries, the dates, the patients, the compound name, the duration of the prescribed treatment. She reads the shipment record. 1 sealed bottle, dispatched 3 days before the wedding, addressed to her sister. She reads for approximately 4 minutes, and when she finishes, the gallery is absolutely silent. Vane speaks first. He leans forward, and his voice is pitched for the nearest guests, and what he says is, "Your Grace, I would counsel you to think carefully about what you are willing to trade. There are ways to resolve this quietly, if you are willing to negotiate. Your sister's continued good health, for instance, is something that reasonable people might discuss." The word beg is not in his mouth, but the shape of it is. Honoria looks at him across the length of the table, past the silver, past the candles, past the faces of the county turned toward her, and she says, in a voice that reaches every corner of the room, "I have never begged for anything in my life, Mr. Vane. I do not intend to begin this evening." Edward gets to his feet beside her. He does not speak immediately. He stands for a moment in the way that a man stands when he has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has decided at last to set it down. "My brother's name was James Calverton," he says. "He died 18 months ago. The physician who attended him recorded the cause as heart failure. I watched him weaken over 3 weeks, and I suspected the truth. And I told myself I was wrong. And he died in my arms asking me to protect what remained of this family. He pauses. I will not delay again. I will not doubt again. And I will not allow the men who killed him to sit at my table and threaten my wife. Vane lunges for the ledger. Edward's hand comes down on Honoria's on the cover before Vane can reach it. Not a dramatic gesture. Simply a hand closing over a hand, the two of them holding the same thing together at the same moment. And Vane's reach falls short. Sir William Denny rises from his chair 3 places down. He does not hurry. He moves through the guests with the quiet authority of a man who has been a county magistrate for 20 years and knows exactly what he is doing and why. 2 men Honoria does not recognize, whom Sir William introduced earlier as friends from town, move from their positions near the gallery doors. At the far end of the room, a county officer approaches Dr. Sefton. Sefton looks at the officer, then at the register open on the table, then at the sealed bottle, and something in his face collapses. He agrees, in a voice the nearest guests can barely hear, to speak to the Crown. Aldous Calverton is detained at the gallery door. He is still smiling when the officer reaches him. The smile of a man who has not yet understood that the evening has ended differently than he planned. And then the smile goes, and what is underneath it is considerably less pleasant. Vane says nothing further. He looks at Honoria across the table for a long moment, the ledger still beneath her hand, Edward's hand still over hers. And then Sir William reaches him, and the evening is over. The legal proceedings that follow strip the conspiracy to its bones. The estate accounts are frozen and audited. The apothecary supplier's records, subpoenaed by the county court, confirm the compound's composition and its source. Dr. Sefton's testimony before the Crown establishes the chain of instruction. Vane's orders, Aldous' knowledge, the 12-year history of a physician who had allowed himself to be purchased. 2 deaths are formally reclassified. James Calverton's name appears in the court record finally, with the cause correctly stated. Honoria sits through every proceeding. Edward sits beside her. They attend together, and they leave together. And on the day the final judgment is recorded, they ride back to Calverton in silence that is not the silence of the wedding breakfast, not cold, not armored, but the silence of 2 people who have been through something together and do not need to speak about it immediately to know what it meant. There is one thing Honoria tells him, on the road home, that she has not told him before. She tells him about Thomas, about the fever that did not add up, about the physician who had trained under Sefton's predecessor, about the promise she made to herself in the empty study at Pembroke House, and what it had cost her, for 16 years, to carry the weight of having looked away. Edward listens without interrupting. When she finishes, he says, "You were 19. I was," Honoria says. "You were 19, he says again. "And you were frightened, and you trusted the physician, and your brother died. That is not the same as what I did. I was 43, and I knew, and I chose to call it paranoia." We both looked away. Honoria says, "Neither of us will again." He reaches across the space between their horses and takes her hand, briefly, and then releases it as the road narrows. The spring comes late to Calverton, but it does come. The study windows are opened for the first time. Honoria insists on it, and Mrs. Price, who has turned out to be a woman of more complexity than her narrow face suggested, opens them without argument. The ledgers are boxed and filed as legal evidence, their work complete, their purpose fulfilled. The estate map is repinned with the season's planting schedule, the notations in Edward's hand marking not deaths, but drainage work and new orchards, and the field rotations Honoria has recommended after reading the soil records for the past decade. 2 cups of tea sit on a single tray on the desk. The fire is lit more for habit than for cold, because the room is warm enough now with the windows open and the afternoon light coming in from the south. Edward picks up the open account book. The new one, the current quarter, the numbers that belong to a living estate rather than a dying one, and sets it aside. He looks at Honoria across the desk, and she looks back at him, and neither of them says anything for a moment. The planting record for the North Field, Honoria says. The drainage work needs to be completed before the second sowing or the whole quarter's yield is at risk. I have spoken to the farm manager, Edward says. It will be done by the end of the week. Good. She picks up her tea. Then I think we are in order. I think we are. Edward agrees. He puts out the lamp. The afternoon light is more than enough. Outside the open windows, the Calverton estate stretches out under a pale spring sky. The orchard's beginning to bud. The North Field waiting for its seed, the long avenue of beeches coming into leaf. And on the desk, the map is marked not with the notations of a man cataloging deaths he cannot prove, but with the plans of two people who intend, together, to make something last. The two cups sit on a single tray. Outside, a bird calls once, and then is quiet.